Well, thanks, Linda. Brothers and sisters, it's a great pleasure to bring the support and solidarity of PCS to this event. I think, always worth making the point, solidarity, not just a nice idea, it's our most powerful weapon. And I think that's recognised by the National Shop Stewards Network. The value of this particular event, an opportunity to report on disputes that are virtually obscured from most media coverage. It's an opportunity for us to talk about how we can give one another mutual support, and most importantly, as Rob and all of the speakers have said, how we can galvanise trade union and working class opposition to the austerity programme. Now, I think as Billy was saying, the Shop Stewards Network, shop stewards, workplace reps, we know are fundamental to trade union bargaining power. We know that from long-standing trade union history, from Shrewsbury to the blacklist constructed built up in the construction industry, to the fact that we find out that there are apparently 9,000 domestic subversives currently under surveillance in Britain today. I'd take a bet there might be one or two of them in this hall today. My point being that it's not just us that recognise the pivotal role of shop stewards. The ruling class and the employer recognise that. That's why they devote so much time and attention in monitoring our activities, in restricting the work of shop stewards, of victimising shop stewards. It's why Francis Maud, for example, is paying particular attention to PCS and has targeted our union facility time. That is a backhanded compliment. That's an attack on us because we, like many other unions, promote an activist culture. And as Billy said, leadership is important, decisive even, but without a fundamental bedrock of a network of shop stewards and workplace reps, it's not possible to translate all of our aims as a trade union into practice. Now, Osborne's statement the other day, the further £11.5 billion worth of cuts, I think tells us a number of important things. First of all, again, as Rob indicated, the contrast between the transfer of wealth to the super rich, and again, reference is made to the 1,000 richest people who over 4 years since the crash have seen their wealth increase to the tune of £180 billion. And it's worth noting that the government's plans, some 77% of the budget deficit, according to the Tory Liberal coalition plans, is to be recouped by public expenditure cuts and benefit cuts, and only 23% of that is supposedly being addressed by tax increases. But it's important to recognise that 50% of the tax increases they're expecting are not from the super rich, despite Cameron parading himself as a born-again supporter of tax justice at the G8 summit. 50% of the tax being recouped is from VAT rises, which we know target and hit the poor hardest. None of the initiatives taken by this government, despite the rhetoric, despite the discomfort of Google executives in front of the Public Accounts Committee, none of these tax increases are specifically aimed at the super rich. And of course, at the same time, in those shameful few days in April, we saw a stream of measures, thousands losing access to legal aid, council tax benefit passing into local control, NHS commissioning charges, the 50p tax rate scrapped for high earners, of course, it shouldn't be forgotten, disability living allowance scrapped, the benefit uprating begins lower than inflation, the welfare benefit cap, universal credit introduced. This is testament to one of the most blatant ruthless class attacks upon working class people in living memory. Now, it also tells us that I think, there's an old expression that was popular with Thatcher, that weakness invites aggression. Well, when you look at the feeble opposition of the Labour front bench, when you look, with a few notable exceptions, but the feeble complicity of Labour councils in wringing their hands and gnashing their teeth, but not mobilising the opposition that we need in communities against the cuts, it's not surprising that we see the Tories more cocky now, apparently, than they've ever been. But it also tells us that there is no respite. The scope and depth of these cuts within the civil service, in local government, in the schools, in the further education sector, the post office, prisons and the justice sector. And that's why PCS members who find themselves out of necessity, but I make the point, what sort of self-respecting trade union would not defend its members faced with the biggest attack upon their conditions in living memory? That's why we're engaged in this programme of industrial action. That's why we're going to be consulting on the next round of action. But our members repeatedly ask the question, we will support the union, but when and how are we going to convert the decisions of the TUC? How are we going to build up that alliance of workers to halt the government's attacks? Now, reference has been made, there's no question, the 30th of November, on the one hand, the biggest mobilisation we've seen of British workers in living memory, but at the same time, the actions of Brendan Barber, the recently knighted former General Secretary of the TUC, who, according to the Financial Times, is now going to concentrate on a cookery course with his friend Mervyn King. But there's no question that that decision of Brendan Barber and Unison and GMB was at best a terrible tactical mistake, and at worst was a deliberate attempt to knock the stuffing out of the idea of coordinated action. But I think, as Linda said in her opening remarks and as others have said, that temporary lull cannot disguise the fact there is no respite and that those tactics provided no protection. Look at the scale of the cuts being announced in local government. And I really want to conclude by saying it's quite clear that a growing number of unions are preparing the ground for their own action in the autumn. And it is quite clear that if the TUC, unfortunately with an inbuilt right-wing majority on the General Council at this moment, is not prepared to provide the leadership and the coordination, it is absolutely essential that all those unions that are serious, that are prepared to mobilise opposition, get in a room together, talk directly, and we organise that coordinated response ourselves. It's always a telling feature at difficult times like this that we see many excuses why it's not possible to mobilise action. And yet it's my belief and my union's belief that if we organise, if the trade union movement made a call for a day of action, mass strikes, a general strike, opened up to all those that are prepared to support strike action by calling for public demonstrations and protests in every town and city in the UK on that same day, that would generate massive support amongst workers in Britain today around the programme of anti-austerity, of defence of the NHS and public services, for trade union rights, for the right to protest, for the opportunity for us to start putting forward an alternative. That would generate massive support. Now, trade unions, we're told, are a mark of a civilised and democratic society. By that standard, the UK fails. The right to strike, according to law lords, little more than a slogan and a legal metaphor, tied up with some of the most repressive anti-union laws in Western Europe. And yet it's because of the fear of the economic and political elites, of trade union movement, of our latent power, that they target us in this way. Fear of a trade union movement that has just seen the first increase in membership in over a generation. PCS will continue its own battle. We'll continue to work with the Shop Stewards Network. We'll continue to work with anti-cuts groups and community-based campaigns. We'll continue to work for mobilising a massive demonstration outside the Tory party conference. We'll continue to support civil disobedience, in particular to stop evictions around the bedroom tax, to challenge civil disobedience about cuts implemented by local authorities, civil disobedience that challenges the role and the power of energy companies. The poll tax showed the power of civil disobedience, but this must be part of the battle and not as a substitute for the coordinated strike action, for the general strike that we need to see in Britain today to demonstrate the latent power of over 6 million organised workers, to harness the massive, deep grievance that builds up on a daily basis, and to build confidence in the idea that in struggle this government can be defeated. Thanks for listening.